Good morning, good afternoon, or potentially good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to day 2 of In a Tribe. My name is Jade Batstone, and I'm part of Swift's Global Innovation team. I will be your moderator for this session. The theme of this session is ethical dilemmas, where you'll be exploring some of the moral and ethical assumptions driving decision-making in the financial community. I want to spend a few minutes introducing what we'll be covering because the format of the session is a bit unique. We wanted to spice things up for you. So what we've done is gone out and asked 6 world-leading anthropologists, sociologists, economists, philosophers, editorial chairs to each record a short clip posing an ethical dilemma. We're going to play these clips for you, and then you'll be presented with options on the screen to choose as an answer. We're going to be using Slido for this session. So whether you are using the app or you're using Sibos.com, you should see an option. It's coming up on the slide now. That's where you'll be able to enter the polling interface. So after each clip, you'll have 30 seconds to decide and pick your answer. And there will be a countdown timer on the screen. Now, there are no right or wrong answers for you. But we did put the experts on the spot, and we asked them ahead of time to predict how they thought you would respond. So after the polling closes, I will be playing another pre-recorded clip of the experts sharing their guesses, and then I'll reveal how you all voted. So we'll get to see if the experts guessed right or they missed the mark. As you can tell, this is meant to be a very hands-on session. We wanted to engage you, we wanted to challenge our own assumptions and really dive in together to some of the ethical gray area in the financial community. But as always with In a Tribe, while we'll be asking some tough questions, we're also here to have a bit of fun. So I'll be breaking up the more serious topics with some quick fire questions. Now you'll have just 15 seconds to respond to these, so you'll really need to be on your toes. Hopefully it's not enough time for you to Google the answers, but that might be its own ethical dilemma for some of you. All right, let's dive into our first question, shall we? So our first question comes to us from Dr. Erin B. Taylor. Erin is an anthropologist and co-founder of Canella Consulting. Erin's research has taken her around the globe, from mobile money in Haiti to payments in Netherlands to financial inclusion in Africa. She's also the author of Materializing Poverty, How the Poor Transform Their Lives. Let's see what Erin had to say.
Hi, my question for you today is it sexist to provide financial services specifically for women? Financial services designed for use by women are becoming more and more common. They include investment platforms, insurance products, female-friendly credit, and financial management tools. These services can increase women's access to financial tools, help them learn more about money, and assist them to carry out their financial activities in ways that suit their lifestyles. This all sounds great, but you could also argue that offering financial services specifically to women is sexist. Doesn't this approach just reinforce stereotypes of women as being different to men? Isn't it sexist to exclude non-women from using them? What do you think? So I have made 5 possible answers here. A, definitely sexist. Financial services should be gender neutral. B, somewhat sexist, but companies should have the freedom to develop financial services using any gender stereotypes they like. Think pink. C, somewhat sexist, and companies should be careful not to stereotype women. The more gender neutral the design, the better. D, not sexist at all. Companies develop products and services for specific consumer needs all the time. E, it's irrelevant. We should take intentional measures to account for women's needs in financial services because they have historically been left out.
All right, thanks Erin for kicking us off. So the question is it sexist to offer financial services specifically to women? You will now have 30 seconds, so enter into the Slido interface on your app or on Sibos.com, depending on where you are, and your 30 seconds will start now. All right, that's time. Now let's go back to Erin and see how she predicted the majority of you would answer.
So, now you've all voted, and I'm curious to see how you respond. As with all good dilemmas, there's no one obvious answer. However, I do have some ideas about the likely spread of your responses. First up, I don't really think that many people will choose answer A. Even if people believe financial services for women are sexist, I find it hard to imagine that many would insist that they should be completely gender neutral. After all, whether we're talking about cars, makeup, clothes, sports gear, COVID masks, or just about anything else, most products are pitched to men or women in some way. And as Annette Brolos and I explain in a recent report, there are many good reasons to design financial services explicitly for women. There is a substantial pay gap between men and women, and male children tend to receive more financial training than their sisters. This puts women at a double disadvantage. They end up accruing less wealth over their lifetime and are much more likely to live in poverty after they retire. Well-designed financial services can't overcome these problems completely, but they can help women close the gender gap to some extent. So I'm guessing that answer C will get the most votes, closely followed by B and D, as these seem to be the most practical responses. I do think that offering financial services specifically to women can be sexist. In fact, there used to be several insurance companies in Europe offering car insurance exclusively to women. But in 2012, a European Union ruling against gendered price discrimination put a stop to this. Today, there is nothing stopping anyone of any gender identity from purchasing financial services intended for women. But it's well recognised that there are many ways that discrimination can arise in both product design and advertising, and financial services are no exception. So I think that C is the best answer. Yes, it does make sense to offer financial services to specific groups of people, whether these be women, millennials, the elderly, or people with non-binary gender identities for that matter. But let's think carefully about how we go about it. Now, let's see what you think.
Let's see. So actually, Erin predicted that everyone would say, or the majority of you would say C. It looks like, in fact, D was the most popular answer choice, not sexist at all. Companies develop products and services for specific consumer needs all the time. Having worked in product management and with product development for a long time, I can definitely say that we are told to clearly define our target customer market whenever we're developing a product, because you shouldn't design one-size-fits-all products. So I guess the feeling is that kind of something similar applies here when it comes to gender. That being said, I've also seen a lot of savings and investment products recently that are designed specifically with women's needs in mind. So for instance, they take into account the fact that the majority of women will have some gap in their career for pregnancy or other things. And so certain savings products will, account for that. So I think the question is, how prohibitory then are the products, right? Is it that, when you sign up, if you identify as a male, you're not actually able to even access that product? Or is it just that the product had the specific customer segment in mind that was women? I wonder if that would alter some answer choices. Anyways, that was super interesting. Thank you, Erin. We are moving on now to our first quickfire question. So let's cue that up, please. All right, we'll have 15 seconds to respond, and your time starts now. Okay, that's time. Let's see what the right answer was. 92. Okay, so the majority of you did not get this one right, which is good because for the winners, you would actually get a prize in Bitcoin. No, I'm just kidding. We don't have that kind of cash in a tribe. But I think if you're able to actually calculate the monetary value of all those Bitcoins, you should definitely get some kind of bonus prize. Okay, cool. Let's move on to our next expert. So the next question comes to us from Diana Finch. She's the managing director of Bristol Pound. Diana is currently leading the UK's largest local currency towards becoming the first payment platform to include local rewards points that help the city achieve its social and environmental aims. She spent 20 years in the nonprofit and social enterprise sector. Let's hear from Diana now.
Today, we face a climate emergency, soil depletion, and mass extinctions. We're often told that our individual and collective behaviour must change if we're to address these issues, like flying less, avoiding single-use plastics, buying organic food, recycling. But how can we be encouraged to change our behaviour? This is the question. Should we use money to buy people's compliance and good behaviour?
Okay, that's the question. So we have 30 seconds starting now. Okay, let's flip back to Diana and see what she thought you would respond with.
As with all moral dilemmas, there is no perfect answer, and certainly no answer that is simple, as if there were only one lever to pull or one switch to flick. I think all the answers have some merit, but equally none is sufficient alone. We do really need to engage everyone, rich and poor, in addressing the environmental crisis and to change the cultural norms around how people evaluate what a good life is for the long term. So work does need to start now on education, on resetting norms through our media channels, and on labelling products with more relevant information so that we can all make informed choices. But we also need to change our market economy to recognise the true cost of extraction, waste, pollution, and maintaining the health and well-being of the labour force. Fiscal measures and regulation will undoubtedly have to be part of the fix, especially in the short term. And this will put up prices. The days of cheap air travel, cheap, poor quality food have to end. So alongside this, we need to look at the generation of shareholder return as the primary driver for businesses, and instead see the distribution of wealth through wages as a fundamental role of businesses. Shifting the balance through wages from paying shareholders to paying for labour could help us address any unintended negative consequences on the poorest in society from price rises. We also need to consider GDP as the hallmark of success for an economy, as this drives the need for constant, limitless growth, which is never going to be in line with sustaining life on a finite planet. Finally, I strongly believe that buying good behaviour would not work in the long term. It would reduce every choice we make to that of a consumer transaction based on a personal consideration of what represents value for money. So instead, we need to elevate those day-to-day choices to become moral interactions with our planet and fellow human beings in a connected web through which we share the world's resources to meet everybody's needs.
Okay, thank you, Diana. So you can see the answers up on the screen here. I think she cheated just a little bit because she didn't specify which answer choice, but she did believe you would say no. It seems that actually the majority of people said yes, that we should be rewarding people financially for positive behaviors. And interestingly, that this might be a way to divert money from the rich to the poor. Yeah, I find this one quite interesting because in the way that things work right now, if you take flights, for instance, there might be an additional amount that you can pay on top, or a fee that would offset the carbon from your flight. Obviously this is optional, but if you thought about it in the future where this would be some kind of mandatory tax, would you see some people flying less because they couldn't afford to do so, or they thought the cost was prohibitive, whereas people with more wealth would continue to do these kind of polluting behaviors and then just, write it off through paying for the tax. So it's kind of interesting to think about. I think especially now in the midst of this global pandemic, a lot of us are flying less. There's been less pollution in cities. I was reading the other day that in Venice, there's actually fish and dolphins in the canals now, which there haven't been for years because of, the lack of traffic and pollution. And so I think it is a question as to, are we going to go back to our old ways? And what would incentivize us to potentially change to carry on kind of some of these more environmentally friendly policies? So very interesting. I think we could kind of discuss that one a bit, but alas, we have more questions to get to. So let's move forward. I think we have another quick fire question coming up next. Oh, great. This one. All right, 15 seconds, everyone. Your time starts now. I find that music almost impossible not to dance to, but I bet we'll get very tired of it by the end of this. All right, everyone, let's figure out what the right answer was. 26,000. Wow, that is absolutely disgusting. If that doesn't make you want to switch to contactless, I do not know what will. I remember when I saw this question for the first time, I was curious where it came from. So there was actually this Oxford study that looked at the bacteria on different types of banknotes. They actually found that the dirtiest banknote was the Danish krone, and then the second dirtiest was the Swedish cash. So apologies if you have been using any of that currency, because it's quite dirty. All right, let's move on, shall we? Let's go to our next expert. So next up, we'll be hearing from an applied anthropologist and experienced ethnographic researcher, Sophie Goodman. Sophie has carved a path for the use of anthropology in organizational and business contexts and is active in bridging the worlds of social science, academia, and business for maximum insight, innovation, and impact. Trifecta of eyes right there. I love it. Okay, over to Sophie.
You are in charge of a microloan product, providing fast online approval for underbanked, low-income customers. This creates new revenue for the bank and strengthens credit history for these customers. You've recently discovered that your terms and conditions, whilst compliant with relevant legislation, aren't providing customers with an understanding of their full repayment obligations, despite them clicking accept. You're behind target this quarter and presented with a campaign to close the gap. Web analytics show that the target segment for this campaign spent the least time reading the terms and conditions. For the campaign to impact this quarter, you must provide approval today. Do you approve the campaign? Yes or no?
Oh, such a tough one. Okay, 30 seconds to decide, and your time starts now. That's time. Back over to Sophie.
So for me, it isn't about which option you chose in terms of your answer. It's more about how you arrived at your decision. So which aspect of the situation did you focus on to make your decision? And what was your gut instinct telling you? And do you know why? I'm more interested in the rationale of the decision you chose, as this can tell you about your personal values that you prioritised in that moment. And I think ethics and ethical decision-making rely on your personal values. So whether you chose yes or no isn't necessarily about choosing the right answer or the wrong answer or what is more ethical or unethical, because this is the messiness and the greyness to ethical decision-making. So why you might have chosen yes is that you felt a responsibility as an employee to deliver results, so you'd go ahead with that campaign. There are expectations that come with your role as well, and perhaps you thought about the time that was already invested in getting that campaign ready to go. Not reading terms and conditions is not particularly unusual, and it's pretty much across the board. It's not limited to financial services either. Why you might have chosen not to go ahead with the campaign is that perhaps underbanked customers, you're thinking that they may need additional help to actually understand their loan conditions, and so perhaps the standard terms and conditions wouldn't suffice. You may have also wrestled with the aspect that just because it's legally compliant doesn't necessarily mean that it's of an ethical nature, or the most ethical decision that you could make. So for me, ethics isn't black and white. It isn't binary. It's actually about the process of making a decision and being able to explain those decisions. And there's actually a great definition by Brown University which pretty much points to that around ethical decision making is about making a choice and being able to explain that choice.
All right. Again, she kind of gets out of guessing which way you guys would go. And it was a 50-50 chance as well. But it looks like the majority of you said no, and you would not go ahead with the campaign. It's a really interesting one. And obviously there's so much behind that yes or no. And this is where I wish we had the opportunity to actually be in person and we could have a discussion about it. But alas, we'll just have to kind of guess what was the driving factor. I thought it was interesting, some of Sophie's points as to why you might go ahead or not go ahead. For those who said no, it could be coming from the fact that your morals kind of trump your own company's morals and you kind of have a higher ethical code. You could also just be coming from a pragmatic perspective. I think we've even seen how some companies that don't take consumer protections or hold it to a high standard can get in a lot of trouble in the news. I remember recently, actually, there was a company that came under a lot of fire. It was one of those kind of buy now, pay later type fintechs for online checkout, and they were marketing a lot to teens. And the problem was that these teens were not very kind of financially literate. They hadn't interacted with credit products before. So they were, taking up this product because they're like, oh, I can get this, these clothes right away, but then getting into large amounts of debt. And, a lot of people were saying in the news, this company had a responsibility if it was going to market to teens to also educate those consumers. But, that's not the law. They didn't have to do it. So it's a really kind of ethical gray area as we are looking at, but really interesting to see how you guys landed on that one. All right, we could discuss this for a while. We have more questions to get to. Let's queue up our next quickfire question. Unicorns. All right, 15 seconds starts now. Hopefully most of you had the opportunity to vote. Let's see how many fintech unicorns there actually are. 66. So interestingly, the least amount of you actually selected this. So we do not know how many fintech unicorns there are, but I think what we can tell for sure is that they're very rare. Every entrepreneur who's starting out a fintech wants to be get to that $1 billion valuation, but as the unicorn name suggests, they're very rare when they do happen. That said, we have a lot of great startups here at Sibos. I know a lot of them are participating in the Perfect Pitch competition later this week. So maybe, just maybe, we have a new unicorn in our midst. Let's see. Okay. Let's see who we're hearing from next. Over to our expert, who is Martin Groneman with Red Associates. So Martin heads up Red's financial services practice in Europe. Martin writes and speaks on how financial institutions can break free from the industry echo chamber and better understand and connect to people's relationship to money. We know that can be quite the complex relationship at that. So stay tuned for Martin's clip.
So most people end up making suboptimal investment decisions. But is automation the answer from an ethical point of view? Proponents for automated investments talk about its potential to take out human biases that lead to poor decision-making. That people are more likely to make bad investment calls than machines because investing requires the processing power that is found in spades in machines, but not as much in humans. Also, removing the human factor could lead to reduced wealth inequality, as more people get access to lower cost, but higher quality services. On the other hand, those opposing automated investments argue that human intuition and experience trump technology, that human translation and sensitivity is needed to craft an investment strategy that fits to people's lives and financial situation. Also, knowing that algorithmic bias is the subject of debate and concern, how do we know that the investment choices the machine is making is married to my values? Can we fully account for these variables in an algorithm? And if not, do we care? So my question to you is it more ethical to make investment decision-making more automated or less automated?
Of course, we could not have an ethical dilemma session and not bring up automation. Let's see how you would respond to this one. 30 seconds starts now. All right, I'm seeing the answer choices come in. Let's go back to Martin to see what he thought.
It's hard to predict the answers when I'm not in the room and don't have a good experience of the people in the session. But my guess is that when forced to choose, most people will have greater faith in more automated algorithmic advice than they have in humans. In times of a crisis like we are in now, I could imagine more people would opt for a more human ethical judgment call. And maybe also a lot of people would have preferred the option of being able to choose both. But I still believe that when forced to decide between the two, there are more people choosing the more automated option. But I am curious to see how big of a difference there actually is between the two. The two other categories, I would be surprised to see a high number of votes. I think there are clear ethical pros and cons for human versus automated advice. So I would be surprised to see a lot of people choosing no difference. I could be tempted to read it as an ethical cop-out if I was to be a little bit provocative. Also, while I'm not sure that most executives necessarily consider this ethical dilemma on a daily basis, I would be surprised if a lot of people answered irrelevant when explicitly being confronted with the dilemma in this session. My overall reflection from both posing this question and reflecting on the answers has been that it seems pretty clear that as we go forward and try to codify good advice for automated investment reasons or regulatory reasons, the more important ethics does become. That the more we try to use algorithms to decode human needs, the more important it also becomes to ensure they're built on the right human assumptions. But also, and maybe this would be my final remark, that we need to consider these questions, or maybe consider looking at these questions in a broader perspective. So our research during COVID shows that what people need more than anything in a time of uncertainty is for banks to show their human face and become a place for stability. That the biggest human problem is not suboptimal investment returns in 2020, but the fact that 51% of Americans are financially anxious and that 90% of people in the UK believe that bank is a transactional provider. And can a machine be an answer to that?
Can it indeed? It seems that the majority of you think so, although just slightly. So 35% went for more automated. Algorithms can make better investment decisions and reach more people. 34% went for less automated. So that is just neck and neck. It really kind of gets at the complexity of this question, I think. I thought there was a very interesting piece in the more automated response, because it gets at kind of reach and access. There's obviously a big rise right now in kind of robo-advisors and automating investment. And as opposed to, your traditional investment platforms where you have to have a few £1,000s in there just to get started, a lot of these kind of robo-advisors, you can get started for as little as £1. I think some of the biggest in the UK are like Nutmeg and Wealthify, Money Farm I've used before. I think it's £100. So, with these platforms, you can allow those who are newer at investment or younger investors to get started in a way that maybe they couldn't with your traditional investment platforms where you're reliant on a human. But that said, our wealth is personal, and sometimes we want that personal contact. And when I was signing up for Money Farm, they asked me to rate my kind of risk threshold for investment. What they didn't ask me is, what are your financial goals? And let's have a conversation about it. When do you plan to buy a house? And what other large purchases would you like to make? My investment portfolio wasn't really tailored to me specifically. And I think some of that, back and forth is what you get from the traditional investors. And so I don't know. This is really another tricky one. And one other element I think is some of you did say irrelevant or no difference, even though it's a lower majority. But I think whether it's humans or machines, we also need to look at here the rise in kind of ethical investing. And the fact that there are now more and more portfolios that are claiming to be ethical. So while they're also investing in, companies that are making a profit, those companies also are solving environmental or social challenges. So for some, maybe they don't really care if it's a human or a machine, so long as the portfolio itself is comprised of ethical investments. Something else to consider. All right, lots of factors here, but we need to move right along. So let's queue up our next quickfire question. All right, 15 seconds starts now. And time. Okay, let's put up the right answer. Wood pulp. This one is a bit of a trick question because, of course, wood pulp is used to make your typical type of paper. Actually, the majority of you said hemp by the looks of it. So you were not fooled, as I was when I first saw this. I was a bit surprised, so I actually looked it up, and US currency paper is made from 75% cotton and 25% linen. So I think that was new for me, maybe for you as well. I think you can Google the others, but I do assure you that even aluminum chloride is used in a banknote around the world. All right, on to our next expert. Let's hear next from Pablo Mondragón Valero. Pablo is co-founder of Antropología 2.0, a research agency specialized in applying anthropology in companies. Pablo is currently also the CEO of Humanix, the first digital school specialized in applied humanities. He focuses on digital entrepreneurship, social robotics, technological ethics, and transhumanism. Okay, those things all sound fascinating, so I'm excited to hear what Pablo has to say. Let's play his video.
Hello, I'm Pablo Mondragón, and I'm a business anthropologist, and this is my question. The financial sector is perceived by citizens mostly as an apolitical agent, one which only follows the trace of money. Banks have financed different parties whenever they saw a business in it, regardless of the legitimacy of the political issues. As we all know, current global political, economical, and environmental challenges require the involvement of large companies too, as companies are more and more perceived as social agents with a great change impact. large consultancy firms and companies from all over the world take a favorable position in the face of pro-democracy and pro-rights movements and show their outright rejection of acts and speeches that violate the Charter of Human Rights. No movement in this direction can be seen in the financial sector. On the other hand, we cannot ignore the fact that many social movements are based on Western values. So a commitment by the World Bank to such movements could incur on a form of financial ethnocentrism. And this is my question. Should financial sector engage and finance pro-democracy and pro-rights social movements? Yes, the financial sector must be a positive example to society and must finance pro-democracy and pro-equality social movements as part of its corporate social responsibility activities. Yes, the financial sector must review its internal culture and ensure racial and cognitive and social diversity, but is not obliged to finance any kind of social movement. No, the financial sector must be a neutral player and must not commit itself to any political issue. As private companies, banks should have the freedom to manage their business as they wish.
Wow, really interesting one. So I think a lot of you have already started responding. Let's go ahead and start that timer. Okay, votes are still coming in. Let's go back to Pablo.
In my opinion, I think that people are going to answer that banks are private companies and they are going to do what they want. Why? Because contexts are very different in different parts of the world. It's not the same political issue for a bank if you are based in Saudi Arabia, for example, and you have this kind of values, that if you are based in the States or in France or in Japan. So I think that people are going to say that banks are private companies and they can do whatever they want.
So that is not how people responded, Pablo, but I think the least amount of people, so 9% said banks are private companies, should be able to do whatever they want. And the majority of folks said that the financial sector has to kind of shine the mirror up to itself, ensure that its own kind of house is in order in terms of equality and social movements, but it's actually not obliged to answer any kind of, or to dole out any type of financial support. I think this is a very interesting question. It comes at an interesting time for those of you who are in the US right now. Obviously, there is mass protests happening around racial inequality, and the way that we've seen private companies respond in many cases is to donate to, organizations that are fighting for racial justice, or to, economic opportunities for minorities. You've seen some very large fintechs do this, not as many of the large banks. So that's kind of something interesting to look at. I think, in the wake of Me Too or gender equality movements, you're also having a lot of the financial services community have to really take a hard look at itself and think about, are there subconscious biases in our hiring practices? Are we, are we doing implicit biases trainings for our employees? But that's very different from, say, donating to an organization. So the question is, do we hold our banks to a standard where we want them to, support our own morals or ethics? I think it gets a bit even trickier when you think about like pro-democracy movements in some parts of the world, where a lot of these are happening, and you think about, the banks separate from the government, and what role should they play here? 25% of you said the financial sector must be a neutral player, not commit itself to any political cause. But then equally, 24% said that it should, actually banks should finance pro-democracy and pro-equality social movements. So it sounds like this is a complex one, and there's a lot of nuance there. But super interesting. Thank you all for voting on that one. Let's move right along, cognizant of time. So let's go to a quick fire question now. This one's close to home. 15 seconds has already started, so get in there and try to guess how many people have registered for Sibos. Time's up. Let's see how many people have registered. 17,398. Actually, 48% of you were able to guess this. So we had to put a date cap on this because registrations have kept rolling in. I think it's, obviously there are challenges with having an all virtual Sibos, but it does seem that like there's been really great opportunities as well. People from all over the world who, in some cases, wouldn't have been able to attend in person can come and join these sessions. I actually wouldn't be surprised if it's our most geographically well-represented Sibos, which I think, is awesome in terms of diverse perspectives in the mix and great mind share. So really, really glad to see those numbers. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's even higher by now, since we capped that on the 2nd of October. Cool. Moving on, unfortunately, this is our last expert of the day, but last but certainly not least, we're going to be hearing from Gillian Tett. So Gillian is chair of the editorial board and the editor at large at the Financial Times in the US. In 2014, she was named Columnist of the Year in the British Press Awards and was the first recipient of the Royal Anthropological Institute Marsh Award. In June 2009, her book Fool's Gold won Financial Book of the Year at the inaugural Spears Book Awards. Let's hear from Gillian.
Hello, here's my question. Electronic automation of the trading floor first started in 1980, and since then, each year, fewer humans have been involved in the trade cycle of buying and selling. Modern high-frequency trading, where a global trade can start and complete in less than 1/10 of a second, is one of the causes that amplifies significant market adjustments or price swings, including having a pivotal role in the crash in 2008. We're aware that increased automation means that companies don't know who actually owns their shares at any point in time, and that a majority of the current owners are more interested in the shift of the share price than the long-term performance entrusted to the directors and executive team. So, is your vision of the future more automation built on trust that those who develop the data and the algorithms are not biased to their own outcomes? Are you someone who believes that humans should remain in the loop and be ultimately responsible, if that's even possible now? Do we demand more efficiency, liking more quicker, cheaper, faster, or do we want to revert to timely, considered understanding and analysis? Or maybe you want a blend, aiming for the best of both worlds that would deliver longer-term, sustainable growth for the future. Whilst we continue to learn and put in more rules for trading and how to prevent catastrophic failures, the system is sufficiently complex that the reality is that no one person can understand it completely or control it. The web of interdependence means a degree of stability and control is guaranteed, This, along with the development of thinking on ownership responsibility with ESG reporting, means we have to ask ourselves, is there actually any merit to having a physical trading room anymore, where people actually deal with each other face to face? Or should we simply move to a world where we trade online?
Okay, another question around automation, online versus in person. Again, very topical in these current times. Let's go ahead and start that countdown timer. Very interesting. Let's go back to Jillian and see what she thought you would say.
My answer? I prefer to see other humans frequently because there are things I can learn.
Fair enough. So in terms of how you all answered, the majority of you said it's a close call. You saw benefits on both sides. Yeah, I think this is one where there's pros. It really is pros and cons. Whenever I think of the trading floor, I'm always brought back to when I was a kid, and we used to play this game. It was a card game called Pit, and everyone had these different commodities on their cards, and you'd be waving them around frantically trying to trade them, like wheat. I have 2 wheat. I have 2 corn, and you're trying not to get stuck with the bear at the end. Obviously, it was meant to represent, the trading floor. And that's kind of how, obviously a very simplified assumption, but I think a lot of us still have that image of the stock exchange as men in suits and waving frantically. And in many ways, that is kind of a thing of the past because a lot of trading has moved to becoming virtual. And it is worth asking ourselves, are we losing anything with that? Certainly computers are faster and cheaper, less error prone, I suppose, with more kind of routine trades. But you do lose that human element. Traders can kind of read people, and they may be able to take advantage of, being able to have that in-person experience and maybe understand more about kind of the motives and intentions behind the counterparties. Just like how in Pit, I could always tell when my brother had the bear because he had absolutely no poker face. So, in a similar way, you can really kind of get more from that interaction. Some would even argue that humans are actually better at making complex trades because you can, not follow just one established process, but actually be creative. I think there are arguments on both sides, as most of you agree with as well, but we can't ignore that electronic trading really dominates the financial world today as a whole. The toothpaste might be out of the tube, as they say on that one. Okay, it's time. It's time for our last quickfire question. Are you all ready? This is the opportunity for those of you who were out there guessing wood pulp like me. This is your opportunity to redeem yourself. Your last one. 15 seconds starts now. What is that company? Confinity. Let's see the answer. It is, in fact, PayPal. The majority of you did get that one right. So for those of you who didn't know, Confinity is actually a combination of confidence and infinity. So those of you who did guess PayPal, I hope you are feeling lots of Confinity at this moment in time. All right, that really brings us to the end of our session, everyone. I hope you found it as thought-provoking as I have. I hope you've had a little bit of fun, while also kind of, challenging your perceptions around some of these topics. We will be capturing the session in a blog post, and it will be available on the Sibos Insider platform in the next 2 weeks. So please do stay tuned for that. Other than that, please do let us know what you thought of this session by rating and reviewing us on Sibos.com. Thank you so much, everyone, and please enjoy the rest of your Sibos experience.